Hi everyone, I'm Kyriakos Gold and this is Autistic Pride Day Symposium in Melbourne and the year is 2024. This session is about autistic entrepreneurship and building a support ecosystem in Australia, hoping that we can inspire people around the country and potentially around the world. Join me in welcoming Sharon and Rue and the rest of the crew. We had a conversation last year about autistic entrepreneurship, and I want to start with acknowledging the change in the space, if any. And I'll start with you, Sharon.
Oh, the change in the space. I would say that there's a lot more support for autistic entrepreneurship, mainly in the UK. So with regards to the neurodiversity entrepreneurship in the UK, that movement has really enabled more of a platform that's feeding into Australia. So they've had 2 conferences, they had, and universities are supporting it. So the opportunity for whole day speaking events at universities that's focusing on entrepreneurship.
How does a university support entrepreneurship when it's mainly talk?
Yeah, so I think that there's this is a big shout out for Rob from NEA, which is the Neurodiversity and Entrepreneurship Association. So Rob's got a background in publishing and working with universities, but he's set up this organisation to support neurodivergent entrepreneurs in the UK. But he's got the relationships in with the universities and he's managed to get them to support more of a grassrootsy kind of, what's needed. And so there's been, I guess, talking opportunities, but once we have those opportunities, even if it's another country, we can promote that back here and start getting the interest here as well. So it's been good that way. It
sounds like not a lot has changed in Australia.
There's a lot of government support that's starting to come through with regards to in the national strategy. Even though it's not in the draft strategy, I should say, even though it's not in the South Australian draft strategy, the Office of Autism is very interested in this area, so I'm expecting it to be in the South Australian strategy.
What about the national?
Yeah, so it's mentioned. So yeah, it's actually mentioned in the draft national strategy.
And what about the social enterprise space? Is that recognising autistic entrepreneurship? Are we part of that? Do we sit separately?
The autist, it's going to be interesting to see what happens because, I've been in this game for over 20 years, so, very active in the social enterprise movement in Australia, and, always been welcomed. But it's welcomed as in, you haven't just have to adapt to the mainstream sort of stuff. There's not anything there that supports autistic people. And it's going to be very difficult to get accommodation within that sector because of how the sector is framed. So it's framed as sitting between charity and business. So straight away it sets up the scene for there to be beneficiaries, and autistic people normally fall into being the beneficiary camp. So there's people that are not autistic running the show. So there's a large structural adjustment within the sector that needs to occur.
Okay. And Rue, you come from a very different space. You are in the VC, highly glossy area. How does it look from up there?
Yeah. First, I'll say we're small but mighty, so we're not in any kind of like high ivory tower or anything, but we invest into women-led and gender-diverse minority startups, but with a broader vision to go into investing into, startups led by many different intersectional identities and using diversity generally as a lever for great investor returns while also bringing about impact. So that dual kind of lens, and ultimately it's conscious capital. What I'm excited about is, for me, at the coalface of it, in terms of meeting founders day in, day out and hearing them pitch and what they're working on, is that I think that between last year and this year, I'm definitely seeing a lot more in the TISM tech space and more broadly the disability tech space. I don't have actual data points on it, which is unfortunate because we are starting to track the data in my firm personally. And it's really interesting though, we have such high representation of certainly neurodivergent entrepreneurs. We don't always drill down into what kind of neurodivergence we're actually talking about, but we're already here. So the government might be working on strategies, there's things coming down the line, but I firmly believe that autistics and the broader neurodivergent community are the heart of entrepreneurship, and we play a really interesting, exciting role that can be, I think, an advantage for those who are looking for outperformance ultimately in terms of returns.
We were having a conversation beforehand how as entrepreneurs we just put like this big smile on and inside there's all this fragility.
Yeah.
So I recognize that you're always coming through like a force, but like when we and can I share this?
Yes.
That we express that vulnerability behind the scenes, and I wanted you to talk to it a little bit if you can.
Yeah, well, I think when I turned up this morning, I said to you, I'm hanging by a freaking thread. I'm teetering on total burnout. I don't know how to not work at 150 kilometres an hour, and I'm absolutely shattered. So, as I said, I'll put my hand up to give out hugs, but I may also need one. And I think this is not only, I think it's the sort of the life of an entrepreneur, but it's also deeply the autistic condition, right? And thank God for having a driving purpose and a passion to save me, because otherwise I'd be just in a complete cave of existential horror. But yeah, I think we're very, very prone to burnout. We're managing so much more at any given point in time.
So the reason I'm raising it is because we may have a neurotypical audience that may not really understand why we're sharing that vulnerability, is because if we're building a support ecosystem for autistic entrepreneurs, we really need to know what autistic entrepreneurship truly means to the person.
Yes. Yeah.
What the day is like, what the night is like, what liaising with people is like.
Yep.
And also, we see a lot of programs about employment, and we are being put into boxes as employees, but as entrepreneurs, we're bosses.
So I think I completely agree with that statement. What I'd like to see, because I don't think we're there yet, but really it starts with the funders of entrepreneurs. That's one place where you can build in supports for entrepreneurs. So venture capital firms, angel groups, how are they supporting the mental health of the founders that they might be investing into? That doesn't necessarily capture all entrepreneurs, because not everyone is positioned to sort of capture VC funding. But otherwise, I guess the incubators and accelerators that are supporting entrepreneurship need to be really deeply focused on mental health, and they know that entrepreneurs have much higher instances of mental health challenges. And higher levels of bipolar, ADHD, dyslexia, there's a whole lot of data around that. So if you're funding or supporting an entrepreneur in some way, you need to be making sure that you're building into your processes proper supports. Separate from that, it's obviously on the entrepreneur to be able to learn to self-manage, and we haven't cracked that nut necessarily. I was just saying to Sharon, if you can teach me everything you know about self-care, because I am teetering on burnout, that would be really helpful.
And I just love the really strong private market-driven lens and the really strong understanding of policy and government. What's the future looking like in terms of policy, in terms of building a support ecosystem, at least here in Australia?
I think there's a recognition that for people who are in the NDIS type world and wanting to move into entrepreneurship, that the entrepreneurial ecosystem is different for autistic people who are engaged in a service system as well, and we really need to provide a seamless service with regards to the entrepreneurial ecosystem and what the NDIS termed the community participation ecosystem, which is all your support services, etc. And it's about how do we actually bring those two systems together to support autistic entrepreneurs. So I think there's an increasing awareness of that needs to be done.
Well, what does an inclusive environment for autistic entrepreneurs really look like? I mean, Ruth touched on it, but what does it look like?
For me personally, like looking, I've got an interest in autistic cognition and what does an autistic business development process looks like, and if you look at it from how does autistic cognition work, and monotropic interest, starting with interest areas, and bottom-up thinking and associative thinking and systemizing, that's very different than a traditional business planning approach. But there is another business development approach called an effectuation entrepreneurship approach that does suit a top-down thinking, a bottom-up thinking way of working. So I think there's a whole lot of skill development for business advisors that needs to occur so that they can think of people, not everyone's a top-down thinker, like a business frame first sort of thing. And so I think there's a whole lot of work that needs to happen there to make those existing systems supportive of different ways of thinking.
And we have a session on autistic cognition and entrepreneurship tomorrow in Sydney, which we will also be filming, so it will be available online. It will be available online. I'm losing my words.
Can I add a point just to what Sharon's saying? From the private capital side of things, what we desperately need to have happen is to educate investors around, their bias. And it goes beyond just with respect to meeting founders who might be autistic, but also, becoming aware of their unconscious bias in all sorts of ways. So at the firm that I own, we actually feed in unconscious bias checklists into our decision-making processes around who we're going to invest in, so that, we ask each other and we have frank conversations around, am I zoning out because this person has a very thick accent that I'm struggling to understand? Or is this person highly performative and charming and I've been completely seduced by them and actually the business is not good enough? And then so when it comes to autistic folks, what we often see, and there's obviously, different processing styles and different communication styles, but, very regularly with those differences, they may not be presenting in the hyper-polished, performative way that so many investors are looking for. So if you're like me, I'm rambling like a motherfucker and I can't stop talking. And the investor wants me to shut up because they want to be able to get a word in, and then others might be struggling to string their words together at all, and it's not a reflection of how extraordinary their startup might be. So if they're going to get funding, the investors need to understand that there are these differences, and they may appear rude or abrupt or aloof in terms of the communication style being different, and some education around that needs to happen in order to make sure that the money ultimately flows, so that investors are aware of their own unconscious bias.
Some improvements that you think we can make like this quickly? And what are some that will require a bit of time?
I think, well, if I think of quickly, I think about, the grant submission that's out there right now waiting to hear in the next couple of weeks, which is taking 100 business advisors through education program with regards to autistic entrepreneurship. I think those sorts of things can happen quite quickly. I think the policy environment in South Australia is there to actually have that supported by government. So I think those sorts of things can happen quite quickly. I think the thing that's going to take a bit of time is getting the service systems and the entrepreneurial ecosystem working together so that we can have a seamless service. So if you think of an autistic entrepreneur now going to see a business advisor, having to explain what challenges they want accommodated for in their business development, and having the information from the business advisor and working for the business advisor, and then having to work on an NDIS plan with regards to what are my goals. That's two completely different worlds that don't understand each other. And I think what we need for this to work is for it to be a seamless service. And I think that's going to take a bit of time.
So I recently went through a female founders accelerator program with Queensland Government. And what you were talking about, Roo, about, I guess, how sometimes it feels like pitching an idea to get funding, it feels like it's all about presenting and performing. And most of the advice I got, for me, I guess it felt like me being forced to mask in order to get the funding that I think I sometimes deserve more than the people that do end up getting it, because I'm not good at that. So I guess my question would be, like, should I just keep pushing on and showing up as my authentic self and wait for the change, or like what's the
Do we add the theatre or do we not?
It's such a tricky question, because I want to tell you, in all circumstances, just be you and the money flows. I think the reality is that even for a lot of neurotypical folks, particularly right now in a market where capital is very, very tight, they're also being forced to be highly performative and step into that pitching world that doesn't feel comfortable for them, for many of them as well. And I speak to lots of founders, and I understand that this is, and I think it's more challenging and more traumatizing in many respects for the autistic community, but this is across the board. Actually, without wanting to sort of repeat myself, last year I did speak a bit about the fact that we need to get away from the pitch as the cornerstone of sort of, your investment decision making. So many firms still have that as sort of being key. Personally, we have more of an interview style. It's not so much a pitch. And I would seek out the investors that perhaps have a process that is more friendly in that regard. I think more and more venture capital firms in the US, not so much Australia, are starting to be more founder friendly in how they think about having you come through their process. We want to share what the process is so that people know what it looks like in advance, and that can give them some comfort, and really think through all those sort of nuanced details about how it flows. But unfortunately, that's just sort of not really here a whole lot yet in Australia. But there are certainly firms that are deprioritising the pitch. And I would find those spaces where you feel most comfortable, because you do deeply want aligned investors, right? There's no point having them on the journey so this goes beyond just sort of the pitching issue, but you want people who are backing you with more than just money, that they're bringing the sort of, the supports and the structures around you, so that, you can be you, an unmasked version of you, because they're going to be in there for the long haul if the business makes it.
It's almost like that Shark Tank conversation. It's like, I'm giving you money, but I'm also giving you my clout and my mentorship.
Yes.
But I wanted to I thought that was coming through. I realized that the theme for the year is taking the mask off. But we have to also acknowledge that performative pitching is difficult for neurotypical people too. You don't have to be autistic to struggle. Yeah. Like, everyone struggles with a pitch. Like, yes. I spent 20 years in media and I still struggle with a pitch. Yeah. So is it more difficult for autistic people? I don't know. I think it's just a systemic change that we need to see for a truly safe space in acknowledging ideas and not the performance itself.
I think that's right. And on the investor side, it doesn't make sense to continue to prioritise the pitch in such a way, because it heralds and prioritises a very narrow category of founder at the peril of the investment firm, who then may well overlook you'd like to think that they do their due diligence properly and that they don't place such an emphasis on it. But it's hard when someone is charming and charismatic and presents really well. You're sucked in by that. Yeah. But more and more, I think, and in a competitive world, there will be this shift to understanding that these transparent processes are needed, which don't have such a celebration of the pitch as the centre.
I almost feel that it has to do more with privilege rather than neurodiversity, as in the school that you went to, how much training you've had, and how confident you are. You might touch on intersectionality, your gender, your economic class, and everything that goes with it.
Deals are still done on the golf course, and social capital and access to networks is at the heart of getting venture capital funding. It's a lot of cross-referral and, you should speak to so-and-so, and that is really tough. But there are ways that you can sort of work that to your advantage. And I would also say, autistic folks are founders of companies already. That we are very much in abundance within the venture capital world. So forge those connections with the autistic folks who, hopefully we can find ways to rise together, because honestly, we're out there, and it's just that perhaps it hasn't had the visibility. So use your social networks to your advantage.
Is this a gap that government and policy can bridge by any chance, or?
For me, the opportunity of entrepreneurship comes across all interest areas, and there'll be many interest areas that aren't looking for venture capital kind of support. And there's a lot of people who are choosing entrepreneurship because of the ability to control their work environment. And that's the number one goal, is not about creating a big business and not about getting venture capital. It's about how can I earn money doing something I'm passionate about, and something which can accommodate my needs and which I can thrive and have a great lifestyle for. And I would say with the work that I'm doing, that's more of the end that I'm probably working with, is that idea of a way for employment, for self-employment, for people in areas where they don't have to do that. Please, employer, give me accommodation.
I love that so much. And venture capital is incredibly narrow, and you can have a very successful business that isn't $1 billion valuation unicorn.
The spectrum of entrepreneurship. Yeah.
The reason I picked up the microphone, I suppose, is because I feel like I'm uniquely positioned in this conversation. I'm someone who has come into it. Yeah, yes, I'm neurodiverse. I'm in the sort of startup stages. My business is working on that gap that you were just saying. I have created a social enterprise business methodology through the NDIS. But one of the big challenges is communicating that sort of stuff, because again, it's that being in the right room and who you're talking to, like contextually, because I suppose there's so much, but for me, looking at the problem, there's so many different avenues that are in my mind. I'm not just focused in on one indoctrination. I'm just kind of looking across the board. So for me, it's a bit of a puzzle anyway, and I always say I'm working on the problem, not the profit. There's never been my incentive, which is also why my business has been profitable. But my goal has always not been to make profit, but to make sure I make no loss. And like you're saying, there's a spectrum to business. And my business is in place to create jobs, not to create profit. So in doing that, it's just, again, how we look at the problem. But that's quite a non-binary way to think about things and to do business. And when you're talking about that to the, let's say, neurotypical framework that is the industry and the sector, that to me is one of the reasons why I came to this event. Not just to speak for AV, but for my own growth, is because it's connecting with people like those in this room where, what's said, it's not matter about what you say, how you say it, but it's also more important who you say it to. I've had conversations with my friends trying to explain this stuff, and, it just gets nowhere because they have no idea. They don't have any idea about my neurodiversity. They don't have any idea about the business I'm working on. So there's a lot of stuff, and I think entrepreneurs in our position get stunted because we then feel like the validity of our idea has been lost because we can't communicate it, when really it's like we're just focused on the problems and things. And one thing I've noticed from my work as a support worker is there is an underlining thing I've noticed, especially within the young adolescent males I work with. There's an active means to want to act in service of something. We're talking about people who are stereotyped for not having the same level of empathy as other people. But then I have walked through the streets with my clients who, on one level, you'd argue if he's empathetic, but then sees the homeless person on the street and actually has an emotion about that, right? Where most people are walking past that person, the things we're having emotions for are different things. There's a part where we don't think about there's a lot of jargon in this. There's a lot of stuff, and we're not focusing on that. It's really hard to have that discussion. I've tried to do the whole pitch thing. For me, it's difficult. You say, give me 90 seconds. Well, for me, this is something. I've come from a baker and a patisserie chef, high school dropout, to be where I am now. I don't even know how I've done it. You want me to explain? Like, there's so much context to get from there to here. And even in this position, when we're doing events like this, I am being looked at to talk about myself. But yes, I get that I'm only doing that because it brings value to someone else. I hate talking about myself, you know, and there's a big element in that where people want us to do that. It is contextually important, yes, but, you know, it's just kind of like getting all these things out. It's like, I want to focus on not being pitchy, not being glammy. I get we need to sell things. You need to get people's attention because attention brings in, you know, the business. But yeah, you're right. And I think it starts in environments like this. It starts with just creating our own little niche circles, but we need to, you know, we can't just exclude ourselves, but we do need to be exclusive.
Especially when in our space, sometimes people want us to pitch just for the feel-good component of it. It's like, oh, yay, you've become an entrepreneur from a baker, but like, where's the money?
Yeah. Not only where's the money, there's been a lot of people who, in my journey, friends and business people, who, again, I know the value of what I have at hand, right? So if you could put a value on that problem, that gap that you're saying, if you just put a number figure, it's probably going to be a high one. Right, so I'm not trying to be egotistical, but I know I've got a solution to a problem that is a value for socially is a valuable problem. But again, it's the same thing that we've got within our industry where it's you say that to people are profit led, and they go, oh, you should do this. So many people are like, take this path, you can turn that into a business, you can make money doing that for your enterprise, and you can use that money. It's like, yes, okay, you're right, but at the same time, that would just be going forward, making moves that don't sit right just to make the money first. And you don't need to think about that. For this sort of business, it's not about just the money. It's like you're saying, the social circles. You need to be speaking to the right people. You know, I'm essentially trying to provide a solution for the NDIS, but I've never had a conversation with the NDIS, right? Where I'm saying I've potentially got a opportunity to save them lots of money to do this, but how do we have those conversations with them? There's a disconnect between, you know, us and them. And unless you're in environments like this, where it's like a bit of a filtration where people can help you get to that person. But if I went straight to that person, again, the thing is, if I had direct access to that, it's not always good. The filters that I've had to go through from that time of one step forward, two steps back to get me to where I am now, I might not be where I wanted to be. Like, I've had the idea in mind, but it's also valuable. So I think there needs to be, yeah.
We'll go to Jeremy.
Yeah, two questions for you, Roo, about what you were touching on. One was, is there almost like a certification for investors, neurodiversity affirming investor, so that they could say that they follow the non-pitch style?
Yeah, definitely not, and not even close. I mentioned before that we work with gender lens investing as our sort of principal, you know, focus. And there's discussion, there's frameworks around that, but we can't even get capital to flow to women. So I think there's a far broader discussion here, and I've touched upon it with a couple of folks today when I arrived and got chatting about sort of a new world order that is arguably emerging, and that certainly the younger generation is excited to push forward, and hopefully we see a tipping point of all sorts of things. Impact investment and impact investing is certainly a thing, but it's, I think, still in the relatively nascent stages. I'd love to see that at a point in time, but it's not in existence currently. Let's hope that with these shifts that are going on sort of culturally and in society that we get there. It's a great idea.
For investors pitching, any advice on dealing with RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, as you're going through that process? Asking for myself.
Such a good question. It is just the name of the game. And so again, I think that, you know, neurotypical folks are often going through 150, I think the Canva founders, 156 rejections before they got investment. The J.K. Rowling kind of story in, you know, book publishing, you're going to have to get turned away a lot. And it's reframing it, the whole kind of Carol Dweck growth mindset thing, that each investor can, you know, give you some feedback when they do reject you, and you take that forward and the business grows as a result. And you also have to really focus in on what's good about your business and learn to ignore what some investors will tell you, because they're not all going to be right. And that's really hard too. But the more with each rejection, you're honing, I guess, your vision and understanding of what you think's going to work. So one way or another, the rejection is supporting you. I know that doesn't necessarily help with the deep, dark thoughts that accompany the rejection, but I understand it. A lot of founders are going through it. Talk to other founders, because you will learn you're not alone, and I think that does help with some of the angst anyway. But yeah, good luck. It's really hard.
He stole your thunder, right?
He sort of did, but that's okay. As a founder who is actively pitching for funding and has been for some time now, I do think it's pretty challenging to pitch, and it's that performance pitching that I think is really hard. I pitched to a group of people in the US, and actually it was part of a TISM Tech event, and yet some of the feedback came back, even though the pitch was in the middle of the night too, that she was a bit too monotone. And I was like, oh, and so the rejection sensitivity was like, oh, is that why I'm not getting funding, because I can't do the sort of performance pitching? And so you do go down that sort of dark hole, and I guess it's wondering a little bit about how do we educate people, or is it up to us as founders to kind of open with, you know, I'm autistic and, you know, my pitch will be, I may read a little bit while I'm along the way, or I might lose my place. So that's one.
Yeah, look, not every investor is going to respond properly to that, and some may take it well and some may not. But I think if you're feeling a positive energy and that it's a safe space to do so, then I actually think give that a try.
And the second thing I think goes back to maybe a little bit about what Jacob is saying about being in the room with the right people. I personally find it quite challenging, like putting myself out there, going to events where you don't know very many people. And I do wonder, like, how that impacts us as neurodivergent founders, how we can be out there more. And the people who get money know other people with money. And I look at some startups coming through who are not neurodivergent founders, and yet they've been able to connect with, you know, high profile neurodivergent people and get money. And I think, wow, well, I'm not in that circle. So, you know, I guess it's wondering, how do we create more opportunity?
I think that transcends community. I think it has to do with privilege. It's like accessing those mentorship programs that are out there for everyone. So then the opportunity, I guess, would be to ensure that those mentorship programs that are mainstream have an understanding of neurodiversity and making it accessible for you. I recently was in a training program that was pitching itself for being super accessible, and I'm very thankful for it, but it was not accessible. Yeah, when it came to the point that I had to ask for what would work for me in terms of, I don't know, note-taking or whatever, it's like, we should have known like 3 months ago. But like for an autistic person, you don't know what your need is going to be till the point you're there. And sometimes you don't even know till much later, because the feeling has hit you like 2 weeks later. So I think it just transcends community. I think it's just a conversation that we need to have about women, about LGBTQ people, about marginalized cohorts overall, like an intersectional conversation almost, Georgie, right? Yeah, that was your question. We'll get to Sophia and then to you.
I personally just wanted to share my own perspective. I loosely regard myself as an entrepreneur who quite honestly struggles with imposter syndrome. And I find that it's a real challenge for me. What I think my strengths as an entrepreneur revolve more around business structures, and because my background's in accounting. And however, because I'm not necessarily driven by profit, very similar to you, Jacob, I'm more geared towards impact and passion and purpose. I sort of struggle with the whole concept of entrepreneurship, because I sort of think a lot of the times it's about this sole focus that's meant to be your income stream, when a lot of us are actually, and one of the biggest mindset shifts for me was primarily around accepting that the pathway of entrepreneurship may involve different income streams until you're actually able to really be able to kick off and build on that one idea. Having an ADHD brain, though, I have multiple ideas. So that, and I'm
It
doing
might have
everything.
to do with your Greek brain as well.
And I'm doing everything at once, right? So the risk of burnout's huge. But it's also this whole acceptance piece around what does my normal look like? My normal does involve having multiple ideas and just going out there and blindly trying to get things off the ground. I think, and also accepting that you're not necessarily going to be generating income just from one venture. You know, it doesn't have to be a single focus. It can be multi-layered. But then the question I have for you after digressing so much is, at what stage in the process of development and execution do you say, now it's time to actually start thinking bigger, particularly when you're not necessarily profit-driven?
I think it's very individual. I would say think ridiculously big right from the first step. But that's just how my thinking tends to be. But why shouldn't you? I mean, I feel like we've got unique brains. We can do amazing things, and you know the world needs a lot of people solving really big problems right now. So I'd go hard or go home. That's just me.
That's a beautiful segue into the question I was actually going to ask. And I hope it's still relevant because I was listening to what you were saying earlier. And forgive me if I've misunderstood the discussion, but I have heard a lot of how we create space for neurodiversity, well, neurospicy, as Judy said earlier, that I love. And what you've just said about is what are we missing out on as a society globally when we don't make space because we know diversity equals innovation, it equals creativity. So where's the balance between making sure that spaces, whether they're in the entrepreneurial space or in the workplace space or anywhere else, that are responsive so they don't exclude people? So where's the balance between that and taking the approach that it's almost still like the burden and the responsibility of getting things right rests with the people that shouldn't be, because it's not, for example, my autism that might be the issue. It's how that's understood and responded to in structures, systems and a society that doesn't make space for that voice, is what I'm saying. So, you know, if we look at, you know, gender, for example, you spoke earlier, we're still struggling around gender equality. If you look at countries that have addressed gender equality or that are doing really well in comparison, not addressed because no one's fully done it yet, I apologise for that, but if you look at globally where there's been incredible progress, there's been countrywide legislation in that space. We have, you know, we've just very recently in Australia now have positive duty imposed on employers around showing how they're progressing towards addressing that gap. Is that something that needs to be thought about more broadly? So it's not the duty of the individual to say, hey, create space and you're excluding me, but where's the positive duty on whether it's employers, whether it's our, in all sorts of spaces, whether it's civic, social, political engagement, where is the duty imposed on systems and structures to say, it's almost like a fundamental, you know, human rights approach that we have a right to equality. We have a right to, our differences are equal. How are systems responding and upholding their obligation to ensure that we experience that equality? Is that kind of making...
Yeah, I'm picking up on...
I'm going to vote for you.
Well, it goes back to intersectionality, right? So we've raised that discussion, but if you look at the intent of intersectionality, if you go back to Kimberly Crenshaw's work and the lens and the framework behind it, it's never about our attributes or characteristics as individuals, because we all have them. We're all different. No two people are the same, but it's the meaning we impose. So intersectionality was always about, you know, whether it's racism, classism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, it's how we actually put meaning to difference, which is, you know, factually, difference is equal. but we impose, and that's what intersectionality was all about. Contextually, how do we experience that? And I think it's the same in this space. So I think, it was a question, and I've now gone on a rant.
But became a speech, and quite a powerful one. And I think just the learning here is like we as an autistic community, we can learn from the work that's been done in feminism or in the queer community, the successful work, because it's not always been successful.
So very quickly, and there was a lot in that, so I won't respond to all of it. No, I loved it. We are overlooking and missing the capturing of the neurodivergent advantage at this point in time. From where I sit, and this is not a whole of ecosystem solution, but if we can prove out how we economically uplift entire societies by doing that, then the money flows. And I mean, that's what we're sort of doing in the gender space at the moment, and we already have that data of 35% higher returns on investment if you invest into a woman-led startup. And I know that certainly with the latest data on unicorns, so billion-dollar valued companies, they found 3 data points that they are, the founders are marginalised, underrepresented folks, so whether it be refugees or LGBTQIA, whatever it might be, and including women, with no plan B and a chip on their shoulder. Well, they've basically got something to prove, and I'm quite sure, I mean, that data didn't capture autistic folk, but my feeling is that they were deeply represented there. And so really there's a data play here that absolutely has to happen so we can prove out the incredible value and contribution that we're already making to then let the money flow more meaningfully and elevate and support in all sorts of different ways.
I should point out that when I often hear autistic, I think that neurotypicals, when they hear neurodivergent folk speaking, they think of this magical world with no obstacles. So it's not that every autistic brain is really fast with no knowledge gaps. It's not without barriers that we go through our day. Yes, some things are easier for us, but some things are harder. So I just need to make sure that our audience understands that it's not rainbows and unicorns flying at all time. Yes, it can be magical, but it's really, really hard to get through the day or the night if you're not sleeping. Like, I don't think I've ever slept in my life. So, Sharon, I was hearing before the notion of systems change. And I know as a complexity scientist and systems change specialist that you'd have something to say here.
I think I want to go back to the point about the rights of autistic people. And if we look at the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, the right to actually have support is starting up a business and being entrepreneurial is in there. And so we've got that, the rights are there. But also we're at a point in time where we've had the Disability Royal Commission and saying the end of segregation. And so we're at a point in time in this space of supporting an ecosystem are we setting up stuff for autistic entrepreneurs, or are we, so that's another segregated system. Or are we going to look at what's existing now and get that to accommodate the needs of autistic people? And I would say, because we're at this stage now where we're saying the end to segregated workplaces, the end to segregated schools, I think we need to be really careful if we start thinking about setting up stuff for autistic entrepreneurs, because of the fact is what we've got to do is change the systems so that we can fit within those, because we really do want an end of segregation across society. So from a systems level, my focus is really on changing the existing systems, because I don't want to see us starting up a new segregation when we've just had lots of inquiries to end segregation.
I was interested in really what everyone was saying about the kind of cross-referencing between the NDIS and the entrepreneurship thing and the social enterprises, the intersectionality of things and the barriers that we can face. And even within our own autistic community, we also have, there might be other things that are coming into play, like I'm a woman, you could be, identify as queer.
there can be co-occurring disabilities in lots of ways. So that's all pretty fascinating kind of interplay. But I think that I just wanted to kind of raise the word ableism as well, because it's something kind of new to me, because I just hadn't thought about it from that perspective for a long time, and realised that even, that I have inherited some of that as well. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've only been aware of my own autisticness in the last couple of years, and realised that I sort of do it to myself. So it's very interesting. Anyway, thank you.
That's a very good point. Like, I feel that too for myself. Yeah.
I guess just how you were saying earlier about changing existing systems, I've been attempting to start applying for, say, like government grants and different programs out there, and I find them extremely inaccessible. And when I have approached places sometimes to ask for assistance, it's kind of treated in the response that, if we help you, that's an unfair advantage. So should I guess, should I be expressing to them the point that I'm like explaining that I'm autistic and these are the challenges I face, and more from like a human rights perspective, that I should be able to apply for this in this kind of grant or funding in a way that is accessible for me?
Can I take that? I'm a pretty good grant writer. Like, I know I am. And it still upsets me when something doesn't go through. But the reality of things is that it's almost like baking a cake, that you need a really good grant application, a really good idea. You need to network within the decision makers without lobbying, because lobbying is not allowed. You need the public face. These are all what I'm saying, they are barriers. I'm not saying you must do that. I'm just saying that they're all the barriers. It's like running and jumping, whatever that name of the sport is. I'm terrible at sport, so I don't speak that language. But it's like a combination of things, and that's the real barrier. So there's no answer. Sometimes there's a little bit of luck, because the person that's going to assess it is just so into their work. Sometimes there's a stakeholder map that's been given by the local council. It's like, we need one autistic, we need one black, we need one woman. And there may be like a lot of really great applications, but they'll pick the top ones. So I'd like you as an entrepreneur not to think of it like a golden recipe, because there's none of that. So it's a lot of hard work, which applies to neurotypical people as well, and a little bit of luck. And the public persona, your autistic entrepreneur brand, at the end of the day, might be the thing that tips the scales off. So even if you put it in writing, they might not read that. But if they've seen you out there, they'll want you in. And I'll say they and them, because that's the reality of things, right? So does that make sense?
For me, I've just written my first ever grant, and so I've never been a grant person. I mean, a lot of the business world, when you think about, starting up a business in traditional business development ways, it's all about prediction and about selling your predictions. And for autistic people like control, like I'd like to know what I've got to play with. So I've always taken what's called an effectuation entrepreneurship a bit, which is like starts off with my bird in hand. What have I got to play with? Who do I know? How can I manoeuvre that around? And so, I think if you can start off really small and build your networks and start off having a small, tiny product or service, and then keep growing and building on that, the chances of getting grants, you're taking a chance, you're making a prediction about what you want to do. I'm a start small and build it up and have total control freak kind of person. That's my way of doing it.
And that's why the two of you, the two different people, are in this panel, because this is like, I'm going to take over the world, and you're like, I'm just going to fix this bit here.
Just controlling it all, you know what I mean? Sort of stuff. And so an effectuation approach to entrepreneurship, they've got another principle, which is crazy quilt. You know, I mean, like you're putting bits all together, sort of stuff. But I think the approach just really fits people who want to have some control and not predict, who don't want to take too big a risk. So I think it's really well suited for autistic folks starting up businesses. It's called an effectuation entrepreneurship approach. Effectuation entrepreneur. Yep. But it's an approach. But even though it sounds safe and it sounds like a small fry, the actual approach came from researching all of the top entrepreneurs around the world, and it was actually their approach. It's not really until you've got your business stable that you have to worry about all the management stuff. Know what I mean? It's about how do you go on your entrepreneurial journey to do this and test it out. And so, yeah, so for me, just start. Don't wait for the grant. Just work out what you can do and just play.
So there'll be a point that you'll be invited to the grant round. And like Georgie and I, for example, our businesses are partner businesses. So we see so much opportunity out there that we're just not invited to. And the plan is, how do I get invited to this round? What is the structure of the business that I need to have? Is it not-for-profit? Do I need a not-for-profit so I can be in this? Because do I need an alliance? Do I need to partner with this organization? Or do I just need to have a really big brand? So it's just an algorithm of stuff.
And totally agree with everything you've both said, the importance of building the networks, getting to know the system. But I think there's also another really important question, whether it's with grant process or anything else. And that's where my focus of my work, it's on systems and systems reform, because my question would also be, is that grant application process inclusive? And if there's something in that process that excludes for any reason, then there's something wrong with that grants process. And you absolutely have a right to advocate and ask for that process to be adapted so you can take part. And if I can give a really basic example, again, with local government, community grants processes. And I've worked with communities where newly arrived humanitarian background sometimes, not the literary or even the nous around how these grant systems operate, because why would you if I've never come across them before? And so the process excluded, firstly, because you had to put in an application in writing, in English, and you had to understand how the system worked. So to me, that's not something that I need to work towards and say, well, how do I develop the language skills and make, adapt myself to fit into that grant application process? But how does that system need to change to be inclusive of me? Because I'm actually entitled to access that grant. So I think they're questions we also, I can see some nods. Ask questions about the systems. Who's designed these systems? The only reason why there's exclusion is because you're not at the table to begin with. We other difference rather than saying, well, who's got power and privilege and whose voice is at the table? Challenge the systems. Absolutely challenge the systems.
Absolutely. But before the system crumbles, these are some pointers getting us. I love how you were like dismantling the system before, the ice machine just went. Do you have any final comments or before we go?
I would just say that I think there's a difference between entrepreneurship and starting an enterprise. And for entrepreneurship, you're kind of like on a journey, and it's if you stay and wait for the money, sort of, you just got to get on and do it and crawl and whatever you can grab, and you're just going for it. And I think that's very different than starting an enterprise sort of stuff. And entrepreneurship is about taking risks and finding opportunities, and it's a journey, but that's very different than running a business. And it's interesting that, Oxford University threw out their business planning competition and went back to a map the system competition because they really wanted to emphasise the difference between being an entrepreneur and running a business are two completely different things. So a social entrepreneur doesn't necessarily have to run a social enterprise. You can make a whole lot of change by making policy change, etc., sort of stuff. So I think we need to differentiate the two.
Rue?
I think I would just say that you're sort of going back to the opportunity of, you know, the neurodivergent advantage, the autistic advantage in entrepreneurship, just each of us recognising that with our out-of-the-box thinking and our ability to see things that other people aren't seeing, that we do have something great to offer, and that entrepreneurship is navigating these tricky systems and, you know, funding flows and all of this sort of stuff. But actually, I think as autistic people, we forget that power is there if we, you know, sort of weave our way through things and take it for ourselves in many ways. And these sorts of connections and being in rooms like this, we can actually have conversations and support each other and find a way through one way or another. It's a non-linear journey.
You know, I was thinking of how am I going to say this, but you just set me up to really thank you two for your support, because you are in our advisory group, and Dr. Tang as well, and Claire Ghibellini that's on her way to the UN for another speech, and Christina Chan, who is going to be with us tomorrow in Sydney. And it's that collaboration with, you know, let's face it, we have no budget to pay you. So it's just been the love and connection and understanding. I cannot thank you enough.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
We're going to close with that.
We love it.
This was our Autistic Entrepreneurship session. We'll have a bit more on the topic tomorrow when we speak about autistic cognition in Sydney. I'm Kyriakos Gold. This is Autistic Pride Day in Melbourne in 2024. Thank you for watching.